الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على النبي المصطفى. الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات. أما بعد, dear brothers and sisters, in our previous session we started the modern history of Palestine or Palestine, and we started with an introduction to Zionism, and we said actually the Zionism we are talking about existed earlier, or there was different types of Zionism came before the Zionism we're talking about, or we are talking about nowadays. We have seen that there was a kind of social Zionist movement, there was a political Zionist movement, there was also a religious Zionist movement, cultural Zionist movements. And today we are going to actually elaborate on the very modern meaning of Zionism. Saying that, we are going to actually focus on the founder of what we know nowadays as the Zionist movement. And he is known, as we mentioned before, his name is Theodor Herzl. And this man actually is considered the real founder because we said after Leon Pensker, if you remember, we said he was a Russian physician, he established the group of lovers of Zion, أحباء صهيون. And we also want to say that this group of Zionists have already made a great achievement for the Jewish people before Herzl. The two major things I want to remind you of is they actually facilitated the immigration of 20,000 Jewish people from Russia between the year 1882 and the year 1904. They also managed to establish 20 Jewish towns in Palestine. So they have done that. But Pensker passed away, and that man, Herzl, came, and he was a journalist. And I want to say, especially to our young people, of course, I am not saying that person did a great job. I say he did a great job for his nation, for his people. And he was really very dynamic character. So we should learn how those people are very committed to their vision and to their people. This is what I mean when I mention Theodor Herzl. So this man came, and I want to say he actually was not a kind of a religious person at all. See, he did not learn in Jewish schools. He did not speak Hebrew. He was not a kind of a person that you can imagine he is a very Jewish or a rabbi or close to be like that. He was not. He was just a journalist. But he noticed and he saw by himself how anti-Semitism were spread against the Jewish people in Europe. And we have seen, and we all know that the Jewish people were almost neglected. Everyone hated them in the European and the Russian, or in the European countries and in Russia. And by the way, I want to say also, almost the statistics is telling us that the population of the Jewish people around the world in the year 1890 and around, they were no more than 9 million people around the world. But what I want to focus on is that actually 5 million of this population were inhabiting Russia. So this is why last session we were talking about we have to understand that the first movements and the first immigration that went to Palestine was actually coming from Russia. And with the Alexander III, he is the Kaiser or the Emperor of Russia at that time, he actually started the expulsion of the Jewish people away from Russia. This man did what he did, and it's very known. They say that, it's not my words. They say that in history, Alexander III wanted to get rid of unwanted minority in Russia, of the Jews. I just give that statement to explain how everyone was really in big hatred to the Jewish people in Europe. Who opened the gates for their territories and their countries for the Jewish people? The only people did so with the Ottoman Empire. So even as Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who actually was opposing that kind, he decreed, or he issued a decree in 1881 that prevented the Jewish people from settling in Palestine. However, he said they are still welcome to resettle in the Ottoman Empire. So what happened at that time? The Sultan Abdul Hamid II discovered the conspiracy and the movement of the Zionists. There is a lot of history behind that. I want to explain it one day, but just very quickly, an idea about that. He issued that decree and he signed this to prevent the resettlement of the Jewish people in Palestine. So we will talk about Sultan Abdul Hamid II in a very, really, this man is a kind of a person that he was really, he did not take his right in the history of the Muslim people. He did a lot to save Palestine. To the extent I want to say, this is my opinion, the expense of what he did to protect Palestine from being inhabited by the Jews was losing his empire. We'll explain that. But back again very quickly, Herzl is considered the founder of Zionism, and he actually started the first Congress for the Zionist movement. It was in 1897. And that conference, or that Congress, is very famous. It was held in Basel in Switzerland. So he started with this, and this conference or Congress used to meet annually for the coming 5 years, or for the first 5 years from the establishment. But before saying anything, I want to say something here very quickly about the first Congress for the Zionism. What did they decide? If you remember last session, we were talking about they were different, is that right? Everyone has a different opinion how to establish that Jewish community. They came to an agreement, as stated, that Zionism seeks the establishment of a home for the Jewish people. And be careful, how did they choose their words? Or how they really chose the words very precisely. They said the word home here in this Congress, or in this report that resulted from that Congress meeting, was actually to substitute the word state. So the initial word was to seek the establishment of a state for the Jewish people. Then they replaced it to be a home. And the secure, to continue, they said secured under the public law. What's the public law? The public word has been substituting the word the international law. I just want to say how precisely they decided to start the first statement of that report. Why? Because they said if we use the word state and the word international law, that would bother the Sultan Abdul Hamid II a lot. So before saying any word, they studied us. They studied the people who were going to oppose them. And they were afraid that Sultan Abdul Hamid II is going to immediately say that will never happen. Maybe a kind of severe action was going to be taken by him because of these two what? Two words. Just an idea about how those people were planning. And this man, Herzl, I want to say he passed away unexpectedly in 1904. You know, brothers, how old was he at that time? Guess. 90? 55? 44, wallahi, brothers. 44 years. And he made that turnover in the history of the Jewish people until today. The historian said this man managed to find that kind of entity for the Jewish people that exists right now 50 years after the first Congress that was held in Basel, Switzerland. What I want to say is, look how those people were planning. This man passed away in 1904, even before listening or hearing or knowing anything about Balfour Declaration that came in 1917. But he did his role in 4 years. I want to finish with this. What is the best thing that the movement did for their people, for the Jewish people? Because, by the way, if you think that the Jewish people are in agreement to that Zionist movement, this was not right. The majority of the Jewish people actually were rejected to be Zionists. So at that time, the majority of the Jewish people around the world rejected the idea of Zionist, the idea of the state of the Jewish people. But they managed in a few years to get great agreement among the Jewish people around the world. And what they managed to do is, they said Judaism, and this is the essence of Zionism. They could convince their people that Judaism is not just a religion. It is the turning point. They could convince them and make them believe that Judaism is a nationalism and or as well as it is a religion. This is the turning point. With this word, the idea of nationalism, they began collecting the people to support their ideas. They started with the Orthodox Jews to support them. And we have, I don't know, if you remember last time, we were talking about the religious Zionist movement. That was actually a kind of movement called, or very known as, Mizrahi Zionist movement. It started by two rabbis, a rabbi and his disciple, as they say. But what I want to say and end with is how those people could do what they did in a few years. And this man, he died when he was 44, and he was not taught in a very Jewish religious schools. He was not speaking Hebrew, but he lived the suffering of his nation. Even he reported that he was a journalist, as we said, and he was one day covering an event in France, which maybe that was the very turning point to him. He heard all the population in France chanting what? Death to the Jew. This is what he reported. Death to the Jew. So, feeling that kind of anti-Semitism and what his people were suffering from, he became to be the key figure in the history of the Jewish people. He was that person. Again, at the end, I want to say, I'm not saying he's a great person, but he did great job for his people. He decided three main characters to work on to get his state or his dream achieved. Sultan Abdul Hamid II, may Allah's mercy be upon him, the Emperor of Germany, and the Pope. And actually, none of them supported him. None of the three people. And it ended up that we have seen this kind of movement working tirelessly to establish what they call their homeland in Palestine. اللهم انصر إخواننا في فلسطين يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصرهم على من عاداهم نصرا عزيزا مؤزرا، ومكن لهم في الأرض بتمكينك يا رب العالمين. اللهم تخل عنهم القريب والبعيد وليس لهم إلا أنت، وأنت خير معين يا رب العالمين. اللهم فكن لهم ولا تكن عليهم، كن لهم ناصرا ومعينا يا رب العالمين. اللهم يا رب العالمين إنا قد خذلناهم ولم يبق لهم إلا أنت، وأنت على كل شيء قدير. اللهم يا من لا يعلم جندك إلا أنت، مدهم بجند من عندك يا رب العالمين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلاة وسلاما على المرسلين، وجزاكم الله خيرا.